Hi, I want to take a couple of minutes to talk to you about some things you should keep in mind as you finish writing and revising your iSearch project. It might be good for you to take another look at a sample essay to see how your writing falls in line with the iSearch genre and the major moves that are made in the iSearch paper. Those moves include explaining how you found sources. So for example, explaining if you use a library database, which database you use, and the search keywords that you use while you're looking through that and trying to find it, how you decide whether a source is good or not. The summary and reporting of what's important in that source. And then finally, the reflection or analysis of that source, where you write about why you think that source is important and what it tells you about the research question. I'm taking a look at Sean's essay, and I want to point out one thing that you should be reading for as you read over your iSearch paper or have others take a look at your iSearch draft. And that's especially to think about the reflections section of each source that you write about. So let's take a look at this paragraph about almost to the end of Sean's essay. He decides he's going to look for one more source. And when he's writing about this source, he says, after reading my first opposing viewpoint on the subject, and he's researching how legalizing marijuana would impact the economy of the United States. He says, after reading my first opposing viewpoint on the subject, I was unsatisfied with how neutral I felt. This prompted me to find another example of problems with the legalization of marijuana. So Sean tells us about why he's looking for another source, what he's hoping to get out of reading more about the topic. Then he tells us, once again, I used the Wayne State University Library database and found a journal called The Potential Impact of Legalizing Marijuana. Here he tells us that he used the database. It would be more helpful if he told us whether he threw in additional search terms and what those terms were. Remember, you want to make it so that your reader could find these sources as well, using the strategies that you used if they wanted to. He gives us a summary of what's important in here. Sean's relying heavily on a quote in this summary, and it would probably be better to blend quoting and paraphrasing when you're reporting from the sources that you're using. So keep that in mind. And then finally, he gives us this reflection. My thoughts after reading this section of the journal made me confident in my belief that legalizing marijuana would help the economy and drug-related crime rates would not inflate. Now, something good is happening here and something is kind of missing. The thing that's good that's happening here is that Sean has found something that has reinforced the initial thing he was interested in. What's challenging and what's missing about this is that he doesn't tell us why this section of the journal article made him confident. And so that explanation, remember, we can't see into your head. We're not with you when you're reading the sources. So you really need to bring all of that out to the surface and write about it explicitly. I would want to know from Sean, why does this journal article make you especially confident that legalizing marijuana would help the economy? So as you're reading through your draft, or you have somebody else read through it, look for places where you are assuming that your reader has knowledge of what's going on in your brain, but you haven't actually written it into the text. The other thing that I want you to revisit is in the iSearch project description. This is the conclusion. Now, the conclusion of the paper, and I'm reading just from the text of the project description here, the conclusion of the paper is different than the traditional conclusion you may be used to in academic writing. Traditionally, we're used to summarizing an argument and reinforcing it or reiterating it in the conclusion. And here in the iSearch paper, because we've been on a journey for the answers to our question, the conclusion is where we can really bring everything together for the first time. So here, I'll start again here. While you may be able to summarize what you've learned, it's also just as likely that you'll be left with more questions or will have gone down an unsatisfying research path. Some of you might be only kind of satisfied with what you found, and you might have more things you're wondering, or you might feel like, oh my gosh, I've spent a couple weeks doing this research, and if I had more time or if I could look at more sources, I might find out X, Y, and Z. That stuff is worth writing about, as no matter what, you're learning about the research process, and most of you will carry this question and this inquiry forth in Project 3, where you're developing an argument about a topic. And one of your tasks for this week is to look at Project 3 as well. So when you're thinking about your conclusion of the iSearch, it should include 3 things. First, you should explain or summarize what you learned through research about the possible answers to your research question. So this is a summary of the content of what you've uncovered with those sources. The next thing you're looking at is an explanation or summary of what you learned about research or writing through examining that question and using the research methods you used. So the first part is summarizing what you learned about your question. The second thing is summarizing what you learned about research or writing. Finally, in the iSearch conclusion, you're going to write a claim about your conclusions in a nutshell. One sentence where you bring together what you learned through this project. Your research process, your writing process, and the topic, all in one sentence. So here we give you a little template, but you can play with this and set it up the way that you want. But here's an example. After finishing this project, I understand or I argue that, and then you fill in the blank. What is the thing that you say you would hypothesize or claim or understand or argue about this topic and or about researching and writing about this topic? What seems significant to you now? These are the things that might drive you into Project 3. If, as you're working through your revision of this project and getting ready to submit your final draft, you want to look at more than 3 sources, remember that's okay. There's no requirement that you stick to just 3 sources. I would encourage you, kind of like Sean did at the end of his paper, if you just feel like you need to look at one more source, to do so. Remember that your final draft is due to Blackboard at the end of this week. Take time to ask questions as you finish your iSearch paper. Ask your classmates for advice or ask friends or family members to read through it. And if you're asking friends and family members to read through your texts, remember that their insight is really just showing you what a reader would understand. They are probably not as familiar with the iSearch genre or with the actual assignment that you're doing. So, but it nevertheless can be helpful for them to tell you what they think is interesting about your paper, and especially what parts they want more explanation on or where they feel confused in your writing.